Is your show recommendable? Is someone going to listen to this and be like, you guys got to hear this? People think it's so cliche to hear or to say, like, you got to provide value. Well, why do you think you hear it over and over and over and over again? Because that is the standard.
This is Brand Story, a podcast featuring in-depth conversations with leaders, marketers, and brand storytellers about their professional journey and the impact they are making on the world around them. Welcome to the Brand Story podcast. I'm your host, Steve Gilman, and my guest today is Rich Cardona. Rich is a Marine Corps veteran, a global top 50 podcaster, the founder of Rich Cardona Media, and he specializes in podcasting, content distribution, and helping others scale their brand with podcasts. So if you're interested in podcasting for yourself or for your brand, this episode's for you. Hi, Rich. Welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon. I'm freshly caffeinated, as I always do before a podcast. But Steve, glad to be here and honored to be here. Happy to do anything I can to help your audience out.
Yeah, I think our audience will be fascinated with podcasts and talking about it a little more. You know, our audience is a lot of leaders and marketers. And marketers are always curious about podcasting. I think sometimes they're maybe a little intimidated by it. I think we have a couple of friends in common. Claude Silver, Chief Heart Officer of Vayner, was on our podcast, and you produce her podcast, right?
My soul sister, yeah.
God, I love her. And that podcast, Emotional Optimism, is actually my favorite podcast, if I have to be truthful. Mm-hmm. And then, do you also produce Brown Table Talk?
I do, and they are about to reach a milestone. Sorry to interrupt, but I cannot help it. They are like knocking on the door of 100,000 downloads within 50 episodes and in less than a year. And they're right there with 5 episodes to go this season. So we're really, really happy for them. They're doing exceptional work.
That is so exciting. That is such an amazing podcast. I just stumbled on it probably just through connections, started listening, went back to listen to every single episode. I'm a huge fan. I feel like it's taught me so much, the bravery and the honesty in that podcast, and just her and Dee together, the chemistry, everything about it is amazing. Your background is so interesting to me. You were in the Marine Corps for a very successful 17 years, infantry, a helicopter pilot, a director of an aircraft group legal office. You've also worked at Amazon, you've helped veterans over the years, and you've been in consulting. So how did you end up in podcasting, and where does the passion for podcasting come from?
It was never part of the plan. Leaving Amazon was never part of the plan until I realized, like, this is just not a life I want to live. And it's not a knock on the company. Obviously, they're extremely forward thinking. They're a brand, a globally known brand. And I mean, you probably got something from them this week, like, if we're all being honest, like, so I get that. That's fine. But the work environment for me, it just was impersonal. And I mean, it's very high paced, which I liked, especially coming from the Marine Corps, but there was some gaps there that I needed to address. And I kind of knew right when I got there, this wasn't I don't think I could do this for 4 years. And I lasted 2, but the plan then was I had no idea what was going to happen. I had stumbled across Gary Vaynerchuk's content, and I was fascinated at first. Like I tell a lot of people, I was like, who is this clown I was just like, this is ridiculous. Oh, wow. But then it started to stick and like really stick. And I was like, okay. So, and that's actually, I started being curious about the people around him. That's how I got to know Claude and some of the people he works with. But I left Amazon and I was like, okay, I moved in with my in-laws, not because of anything he said, but because that was just our only option essentially. So we moved in and I started just messing around, Steve, with like photography and video. And the only reason I even looked at those things is because I really enjoyed doing them in my off time, although I had no formal training. Just like everybody else, I was just curious. The funny part of this whole thing is I don't tell this part ever, really. I applied for entry-level positions at all kinds of photography shops in Virginia, and no one called me back.
Oh, man. I wish you'd talked to us. I would have called you back.
Yeah. And I was just kind of like, what is the problem here?
That's crazy.
I was like, I just want to learn. And my wife's like, you're overqualified. I'm like, I'm trying to tell them I can do so much for you. I just want to learn. I want to know like what an f-stop is, like all the basics. But eventually that led to me starting a podcast with other new entrepreneurs. And what I learned was, and I know you know this, is just like it's just so fun to have conversations. It's literally one of those things you're like, like I could do this all day, but this doesn't necessarily pay the bills, right? Like especially if you're unemployed and trying to start a business. But that led to a business where I really got into personal branding content specifically for LinkedIn, and it evolved into podcasting specifically last year after we pivoted a little bit from after reading this book called $100 Million Offers. And I realized with some of the podcast success I've had, repeatable success, I believed I could do it for others. And that's how I landed there. But it was a very disorienting, ugly road. And I mean, I'm glad I am where I am, but it was not pretty by any stretch of the imagination.
I think a lot of successful people and a lot of successful roads, especially in entrepreneurship, are just straight up messy. There's a lot of left turns, there's a lot of unexpected, what you would think at the time are setbacks, but they turn out to be blessings in
Yeah, and I saw
disguise.
that post you posted recently,
Oh
that
yeah.
that one that's kind of gone viral, the guy
Yeah.
falling off the staircase onto a trampoline.
God, I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great analogy to how success actually works, right?
Yep.
And I just love how relaxed the person is. I can't say I was always that way. You struggle and you have anxiety and it's so hard. And I think you start to learn that, if you're connecting with people and you're actually helping people, good things are going to happen, period.
So, Steve, let me share this. It's so fresh. That's why I want to share it. I was at church the other day, and there was a message, and I always usually tie these things into business somehow. So this is very much paraphrasing or just flipping it into how you could use it for business. But we were talking about hard times, of course. This is something that always comes up, and I was thinking about it in entrepreneurship, and I was like, wow. If you lose a prospect or a client or you missed a deadline or any of these things, there's like these moments, these periods, short or long, of like kind of like devastation,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And then it just comes to the point where you're just contemplating, like, should I even be doing this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what?
What am I
Like,
doing?
what? Yeah, like maybe it would have been better to stay at Amazon, right? Like you start thinking these crazy thoughts. And I think the way, and this is why I kind of interjected, you just continue to deliver, right? It doesn't matter if there's a setback. Like, where have you delivered? Can you deliver more? Can you just continue to deliver? And instead of deliver, I like to think of it in my head, especially from a Marine Corps mentality, is like a serve. Like, how can I serve? And if you just don't stop that, then those periods of contemplation start to shrink a little bit, right? Because you know what I mean? Like you know what to do. You just need to do more of it.
Yeah, we've been in business for going on 28 years, 27 years in
Congrats.
business.
That's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, we started in Washington, D.C. We've had so many different clients. But yeah, millions of setbacks, different changes, all sorts of things. And, when I started to learn, and it was always part of me because I have a theater background and I love working with people and I love connecting with people. If you're just honestly in this to help someone else, not sell them something, that's the difference right there.
Yeah.
Just show up
Yeah,
and serve, show up and
yeah, that's
help.
it.
Don't manipulate, don't try to make someone buy something they don't need, all of that. So, yeah, I have a feeling you and I could talk for like 3 hours today without any problem. I've been looking forward to this so much. But I'm gonna talk about podcasting a little bit, and then at the end, I want to come back and talk a little bit more about entrepreneurship because I know you're on this journey of entrepreneurship. You and I have that in common. Love to talk to you about that more. So one of the things I noticed about very early on in your podcast journey, you were able to get some amazing guests. I think people notice that right away about your content. You talked with Gary Vee, Kendra Hall, you know, Jocko, all these people that are so difficult to get in front of. How did you manage that?
I love the challenge of gatekeepers. I love the challenge of getting in person, especially with these people. It's it's almost like a game to me, which you can't win every game. So it's where I have the thickest skin. Like I have a DocuSign out and I get ghosted by a prospect. That's like, I want to cry in the shower
Yeah,
in
that
the fetal
hurts.
position for like 2 days.
Yeah.
If I get a no from one of these, I'm just like, for now, it's literally one of those things. Like it just means it's a no for now, but I'll figure it out. So the way I did this was, and this is like, I really probably need to formalize this, but Number one, I follow the content. I don't just appreciate the content, I engage with the content, right? Like there's a difference,
You're preaching to the choir right here.
right? There's a difference. There's a huge difference. So, then I would just be like, okay, like I told you already kind of like how I discovered Claude. I like to look at the people around these people, and I determine that helps me determine if I'm on the right track. Like, am I just being impressionable, or is this someone that I actually jive with, that I think understands people like me or was someone like me at one point in their life? So that's a really, really big deal. The third is, what's the kind of level of altruism? And you and I know those names right there, like they do a lot for a lot of people and it doesn't cost anything. And they're just kind of this element of goodwill that is kind of in their DNA that I resonate with deeply. The next step is I invest. If they have a course, if they have a book, anything like that, I study the course or I take the course, I read the book, and guess what? Knowledge acquired, my friend Chris Do says this, knowledge acquired is not the same as knowledge applied. And that's a big deal because guess what you have if you have that knowledge and you're applying it? You have the ability to kind of tag those people, and maybe they'll see it, maybe they won't. But one of those things where you're able to be like, wow, reading $100 million offers absolutely helped me pivot from just strictly video marketing to video podcasting, and it 3x my business. And here's some of the things I learned along that journey. Like if that person happens to get a sniff of that, that's your name might stick out. And then maybe you'll reach out to them one day and say, can I help with your LinkedIn? And they'll be like, yes, because they've seen me tag them enough times. Okay. So
You're really in there doing the work yourself and
of
making friends and
course.
making connections. I've seen people try to outsource it and it just doesn't work.
No, 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 you can't. You can't do that. So here's the kind of like really advanced aspect of that. Once you have the knowledge and you've been applying it, the critical piece here is, can you be a case study of these people? There's nothing more flattering. There's nothing more flattering if you're just like, you've really kind of just ingrained, like taken what they've taught you and ingrained it. Okay. Like that is so many people take Gary Vee's advice or Jocko's advice or Kendra's advice or Dory Clark's advice, all these people's advice for a little bit. And then it kind of ceases. But what if it becomes habitual? That's like a dream come true for them, because a lot of people who buy their stuff don't do anything, really don't do anything. They will enjoy the book or enjoy the course or not finish the course. So that's a big deal. And then the last piece I would say is, how can you serve them? You've already served them in a way, you've invested in them, you've tagged them, you've tried to be a brand ambassador to them, but is there anything else you can do? This is where I think getting people on your podcast is important. At the time of some of those podcasts, my audience was very specifically veteran-owned small businesses or veterans looking to start their own business. And I knew at that time that 25% of veterans want to start their own business and only 2% actually do. And I was trying to help solve that problem. That's the tagline. That, not the tagline, but that is the pitch. Okay. I really think my audience can benefit from hearing you. By the way, do you have a big military audience, Jocko aside? You know what I mean? And it was a yes. It wasn't that bad, but that's the template I kind of used. Please steal it. Please use it. And the last criteria, Steve, is if you inspire me, it's like I'm on a mission to get in front of you. So it's not just who I can get. It's not just, oh, I want the big name because they're the big name. Is there anything about you or the work that you're doing that inspires me? And if the answer is yes, that's going to be my kind of mission now, is to be like, all right, well, got to land you on the podcast somehow. Let's do this.
Man, that is so great to hear. That like, you wouldn't believe the shot of just joy and confidence that gives me from a podcasting point of view, because that's my method. And I just came up with it on my own. I was inspired by Gary Vee. It's why I started this podcast.
Yes.
But I can't do an episode unless I'm excited, deeply excited about talking to the person. So when you're really seriously into what the person is offering and you're a fan for real and you're applying what they're teaching, it makes the connection more natural, I think.
Deeply.
That's so cool. So one of the things that you talk about that I love how you put it, because I don't hear it a lot in podcasting. You hear a lot of like push strategy and get strategy and a lot of selfishness in podcasting. And you talk about the listener's promise. keeping that top of mind. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I'm going to be very careful. I think I said it, but in case I didn't, it was my co-host Heather Parody, also she's a phenomenal podcaster. But it was, I would just say it was kind of a united thing that we were committed to when we started a podcast together. And this podcast, Steve, hit 100,000 downloads in less than 100 days, 1 million downloads in less than 8 months. And I'm not saying that to toot on our own horn. I'm saying that because we did not deviate from what you just asked me, which is a listener promise. We were deeply committed to helping people learn about NFTs. NFTs were the number one searched Google term in 2021, and we knew that.
Yeah, it was a great podcast too.
Yeah, thank you. And we
Mm.
knew it. But we also knew that we were investing thousands of dollars. We were almost blindly following Gary Vee. And we're just like, okay, we want to be early on something for the first time in our lives, not late. So we had no way to be accountable to each other about it. So we're like, why don't we learn in front of everybody so that way they can get the same knowledge that we're getting at the same pace, and we'll do all the research, we'll do all the episodes. So our listener promise was to help you learn about this completely obscure and new space in 20 minutes or less, and do it in a fun and engaging way. Those sound really simple, really lofty, just kind of blanket, whatever. But that's exactly what we did. And we would reference Forbes, we would reference Investopedia articles, we would interview obviously people who were prominent in the space or doing good things, Tom Bilyeu or Vayner NFT CEO, Avery Akinini, like things like that. So we had our promise, and I believe, to fully answer your question, it's just, are you going to give them what you said, period, consistently? And if we deviated from that, we usually actually had lower downloads. If we just got a little bit too personal or too fun, I absolutely saw a little bit of a difference in downloads. But if we kept a listener promise and did exactly what we said, then that's when we got the kind of reviews that we got, which is like, I learned so much, or I bought my first NFT because of Rich and Heather, things like that. And then you're like, we are doing our job.
Yeah, that is so cool. I feel like that's a real common thread through the work you do, is educating people and helping them learn. And there are podcasts that are made to entertain, and there are podcasts that are made to educate. And unfortunately, there are a ton of podcasts that are made to sell you something,
Mhm.
which are my least favorite kind. But that education piece of really being passionate about helping others comes back to I think your focus on service. And so do you think that's where a lot of the success you've had has come from?
I think so. It's just, why keep it in? It's just like, why keep it in? So this is a very important distinction for anyone who's contemplating a podcast out there. So Steve has 28 years, okay, of your very specific expertise. So obviously you could come on and you could talk about it. We had no expertise, but we're still both educating. So one of them was more of documenting, not creating, and the other one was creating based off of your expertise and authority. It's very, very different, but success can be had in both lanes. So I think that's a distinction a lot of people don't pay attention to. But I believe if the premise is to educate, if the premise is to get you from 1 to 2, in this area, whether it's self-improvement or fitness or mental health or finances or marketing or branding, and that is accomplished at the end of the episode, if they feel like, wow, well, I have a takeaway, then great. I mean, the same could be said for conferences. You could go to conferences and maybe only take away one thing, but that one thing might be what made it worth it. So that's how I kind of look at it.
You never know when that one thing is going to change your perspective and bring you a lot of value. So sometimes you miss even hearing it, and then later it shows up. So what do you think is one of the biggest challenges people face in starting a podcast, or growing a podcast? What do you think really gets in people's way?
And please remind me. I'm going to answer this in two parts. So the growth part is separate, but I think the biggest challenge, to be completely honest, is not what a lot of people think. A lot of people think it's a tech, or I don't want to see myself, or I don't think anyone will listen, or anything like that. I think what I actually think is people think it's too easy. People think it's so easy. They're just like, yeah, I'm going to just grab a phone, plug in my AirPods, go in my closet. I'm just going to go at it. And yes, there are low maintenance aspects of it, but to truly make what I like to say, like a recommendable show or episode, and as a business owner, a podcast is essentially a small business unit. Like if you really, really want to do it right. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, but I think people think podcasting is so easy, which is why, whatever, by episode, there's this term for everyone listening called pod fade. By around episode 7, they're just like, I'm done. And maybe there's expectation management issues. Maybe they thought they were going to be an overnight sensation, that, this is going to be the easy way out because Instagram's too hard or LinkedIn is just not pushing my stuff. Well, that doesn't really change wherever you go. I don't think anything, all success is uphill. It doesn't matter what medium you want to use. Okay. So that's just the way it is. So I think that's number one, is people think it's easy and they get deflated when they look at podcasting as maybe the simplest medium to use, and it does not all of a sudden change their lives. So there's that. Growth is a completely different aspect, not aspect, but consideration. And growth is a unique challenge. You can post your videos on YouTube. You can have very beautifully edited videos on YouTube, and YouTube is pushing podcasts right now, but maybe nothing happens. You could put all your clips on social media, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on TikTok, on Instagram, and maybe that'll happen. The number one determinant, and this is from a gentleman from Edison Research who I heard at Podcast Movement a year ago. He said, we did this massive, massive amount of data analytics because we all know that's all you care about.
Yeah.
Everyone here, all you care about is what is going to make my show grow.
Right.
And I will never forget. And he said, is your show recommendable? It had nothing to do with the length. It had nothing to do with the format. It had nothing to do with the cover art. It had nothing to do with the show notes. Is it recommendable? Is someone going to listen to this and be like, you guys got to hear
Does
this?
it have value? Yeah.
And I mean, like, people think it's so cliche to hear or to say, like, you got to provide value. Well, why do you think you hear it over and over and over and over again? Because that is the standard.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. There are lots of things you can do in promotion, and being patient about it. I see a lot of organizations or people that start podcasts that just aren't patient. They just want, we live in such an instant satisfaction world, and social media makes that even more challenging. We want instant feedback. Podcasting is a long tail strategy sometimes. It's a thing that you better be doing it for more than just the accolades or followers or revenue stream. You better have some real passion for it. And I think when it connects to real passion is when it actually can be successful.
I could not agree more. And I'm glad you said that, because having launched podcasts for many clients at this point, those who lead with the intent on it becoming a revenue stream usually are the ones who are visibly, in my opinion, detached, right? They are saying things for the podcast. They are trying to make it more entertaining than it has to be. They are relying on being a little bit extra when who they are as they are is probably the best thing. That expectation is something we now have to temper, in discovery calls and even in our terms and conditions. And I like to use a weight loss analogy on this one, because it's just like, I could be going to the gym and eating right and the scale might not move, but maybe I'm starting to see my muscles some more. Maybe I'm not huffing and puffing when I go up the steps. Like, there's qualitative wins. And you know what? In this society, a lot of people don't want qualitative wins. A lot of people are like, I want to see dollar signs. I want to see top line go up. It's just something to consider. And I just believe this stat is really important, and I just want to share it because it's fresh. There's a study at the end of Q3 2022, and I really I'm sorry I cannot remember the source, but according to Spotify, there's 4.4 million podcasts in existence. Apple is saying 2.2. That's a pretty big deviation, but either way, let's just call it 3 million podcasts out there. So a lot of people, so whenever anyone says everyone has a podcast, I'm like, not really, 3 million. Yeah. Yeah. So how many of those 3 million are active? Active podcasts, meaning publishing once a month, which is low. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty low. So once a month, there's 300,000 of those 3 million publishing once a month. Of those 300,000, how many of those are publishing once a week? That number is about 155,000. So if you are publishing once a week, Your competition is 155,000 other podcasts. And by the way, you have that in your favor because there's categories. There's news, there's religion, there's sports, there's entrepreneurship. Now, do you want to compete with the 1.38 billion active users on Instagram? Or do you want to potentially rank your podcast globally or in the United States? So just think about it. It's a long tail, but the opportunity is massive at the same time.
Yeah, it's not a saturated marketplace at all, especially when you put it that way. That's a great way to put it. It also makes me want to publish once a week now. The impatience factor too, I think for brands, especially, there are a lot of companies that could really benefit from having a podcast, especially those that have a really good purpose-based brand. So they exist because they're trying to solve a problem. Perfect place to have a podcast, but they don't see the return on investment fast enough. And I think that's a big challenge. For us, I started this inspired by Gary Vee, inspired by several podcasts you produce, honestly. And I started this with the knowledge of like, hey, and when I get to 50 actual really good quality episodes, I'll try to figure out what this is really about. For right now, all I care about is quality. That's all I care about. I want to have great conversations. If I want to refine it, I'll do it after 50 episodes.
Let me ask you a question. I'm a podcast host as well. So I'm going to
Yeah,
ask the host a question.
sure, go for it.
What was it that you said to yourself, or what was it that allowed you to be like, yeah, I'll get to 50 and then I'll see, where the majority of people that we know or who would want to start a podcast would be gone after episode 11 with 100 downloads and they're super frustrated?
I think patience. I think I'm a very patient person. I've been in brand and marketing for so long, and especially on the brand side where you're trying to build awareness. You're not just trying to get performance metrics. So we do both. We have someone here that's amazing at performance marketing. I do brand marketing. It's all long tail, but it is actually what differentiates. It's the number one differentiator. So for me, this is a brand thing. And even more important than that, Rich, is this is deeply personal to me. And this is what I love. I love learning from people. I love one-on-one conversations. I started this at the beginning of the pandemic because I really missed this. So for me, this is
Yes.
just, I love stories. I love telling stories. It's really all I care about. So, I'm here to tell your story today. So that's the most, I feel like I just talk too much, honestly. So
No, I love it. I asked you a question, so it's totally fair game. But I love that, and I think just to bring that full circle for your audience, if anyone wasn't paying attention, he said it's deeply personal. Not caring is really hard for people who have a business or money behind it, but it's almost as if the less you care, in a way, like the better awareness you'll probably get because you are just being exactly who you are on a regular basis. And I believe people could sniff out when it's when you're putting up the veneer, so to
yeah,
speak.
when you're just doing it for profit or doing it to promote, like that's what drives me crazy in podcasts is the people who have their value proposition just underneath the surface and see how many times they can mention it.
Yes.
God,
Yes.
I'm out,
Yes. Yep.
you know? So I just think that's what I've learned about successful people, and how to be successful is to be truly present and truly try to understand someone else and stop being about yourself so much. And when you do that, cool things happen. So that's that's like if I had a concept for this podcast, that's it. For people out there that have started a podcast, let me just segue a little bit here. Everyone is concerned whether they have a good podcast or whether they're struggling or whether they're starting to grow, just about how to some simple tips of promotion, just some ABCs, because it's really there's some real crap information out there.
So social media is a must despite the results you may not see. There's a very big difference between podcast promotional episodes, no matter how non-promotional they look. To me, there's just a decrease in reach and engagement with those compared to a very specific post where I'm trying to help someone and it's from my phone rather than Riverside or something like that. So it's a must. It's still a must because there's lurkers. Okay. There's plenty of people who don't engage with your stuff, whether it's a podcast promotion or not, that are kind of just hanging out. They don't like to interact. They just like to look. And telling you, some of these people are clients of mine now. I didn't even know. I'm like, you've been following me for how long? Like, that doesn't even make sense. So that's why social is a must. So I would try and repurpose everything you can. Make sure you put it everywhere. Okay, so that's easy, low hanging fruit. We all know that. Is it fruitful all the time? Absolutely not, but it's essential. The second thing I would say is a lot of people misplace their calls to action. Sometimes people lead with them at the beginning of their podcast, which isn't necessarily bad, but people are most engaged halfway point of your podcast. If you and your guests are doing a good job, or if it's just you and you're killing it, that's where they're most engaged. Okay, so that's a big one. Do not, I would say, try and ask for a rating or a review, or for someone to share it. Or if you have, let's say I have a podcast course, which I don't, but let's just say I did, and I put it at the end of the episode. Look, no matter, my best client who reached #2 in entrepreneurship on Apple Podcasts, like, the listen rate, the listening percentage is 93% on the best episodes. Okay. But typically in the 80s. That's saying, like, people don't stay to the end, even if it's amazing content. So don't put your calls to action towards the end. I would recommend the middle. I think if you have a sponsor, I think host read ads hit way better than if you have someone else read it. And I also always ask my sponsors, like, look, you could send me what you want, but I'm going to put it how I want, because my audience expects to hear it in a relatable fashion, not me saying, I mean, I hear it on ESPN. I don't really watch TV, but I listen to ESPN radio, and it's just so funny when they have to read the ads. I'm like, this is so ridiculous, but that's another one. And then in terms of promotion, I think the amount of work you do on the front side of a launch is critical, and it's not over if you've already started. It's not too late. If you have an email list, if you have a lot of LinkedIn connections, and I'm talking the kind that you could DM, just be like, hey, you don't need to ask them to review or anything like that. Just be like, I'm wondering if you could give me feedback on this episode. I know you don't have a lot of time, but I think for you, this is an episode that might provide some value for you, something along those lines, you would say, words to that effect. And just ask for their opinion, because now it's different from just like, can you listen to my stuff? It's more like, your input is valuable to me. And people like to give feedback. We did that with Brown Table Talk at the
Yeah,
beginning
right.
when we launched. And I would say they emailed, I don't know, probably, let's just call it 100 people. I think 50 people, maybe like 60 people replied or engaged. And then out of that 60, high 80s percentage provided feedback. Like, we love it. We would definitely listen to it, even though we already had recorded the entire season. So it's like, they already had the writing on the wall, and they just kind of blew up, and they've been getting ratings and reviews consistently. But those are the types of things to make that easier. And this is the hard work that no one wants to do. If you want to make that even easier on yourself, especially if you're on LinkedIn or something along those lines, I would send you, Steve, a voice message. I would send a voice message and be like, so that way, I didn't just copy and paste something. Be like, hey, hope the podcast is doing super well. I am coming back. I'm relaunching a podcast. We rebranded it. Here's the direction I want to go. If you could preview like 5 minutes of this 10-minute episode and let me know, like, would you listen to it or what could be better? I value you as a podcaster and as a podcast host as well. Like, just let me know. If not, no worries. Thanks. Hope all is well.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's great.
I don't know. That was 30 seconds or
Yeah,
less.
that was like an easy 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's hard work. No one wants to
Sure.
do that.
Yeah.
But people will if you take the time to leave them a message.
Yeah. Almost everything of value in promotion is usually hard work. There aren't any
Yes.
easy, fast fixes. Like, people always want to
Yes.
find them. It's interesting. There's sort of a theme that you keep talking about, and it's just underneath the surface, and it connects with brand in such a cool way. Is that Meta's podcast, Meta and Dee's podcast, the podcasting you're done, they all connect with that person's purpose, and they all connect with what they care about. And then even when they're promoting, it's again personal. They're trying to build a network or build an audience, one audience member at a time, not 10,000 at a time. So I just think that like, your advice is great, because I think people need to know the value of just one-on-one connection and the value of being patient while they're trying to grow.
Yep. I mean, you hear of viral posts all the time, but you don't hear of a viral podcast.
No, you really don't, do you?
You just don't. But how does Lewis Howes and some of these other prominent podcasters, how do they build it? It's just by consistently bringing it and doing it for long periods of time. And then all of a sudden they're getting picked up by Sirius Radio on massive contracts. It's like, hello. Joe Rogan has been doing this forever.
Yeah, he
He's
did.
not new to the game.
Yeah,
So just think about these things before, you call it quits.
yeah, and then a lot of the people, a lot of the Joe Rogans or the Rich Eisens or these people, they've built huge audiences and huge personal brands before they started a podcast. So it's like, sometimes people compare. They'll compare their audience and their work with someone like Joe Rogan, and then they get discouraged. And, everyone's coming at this from a different point of view. So there are a lot of different goals in podcasting. So can you talk about maybe some of the different kinds of goals in podcasts you see?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the goals, I believe I'll start with a couple that I think are the most underrated goals of podcasting. And those two that stick out to me. Number one is public speaking. I could listen back to this episode and be like, oh man, like there's a couple times it's just like, just get your words straight, or tighten it up a little bit. But I believe it helps you enhance your public speaking if that's something of interest to you. I got invited to a couple conferences recently of friends who were throwing conferences, and I'm like, I'm sorry, like I'm in a place right now where I'm only going to conferences unless I'm speaking. Like I'm really trying to take that aspect of my business seriously. And they didn't take it personally, but what do? I need to get on podcasts and I need to speak more to speak better. So that's one. And the second one is networking. People do not realize this, but it's like some of the people I've interviewed, a lot of that was because I had some big time questions that I wanted to hear
Yeah, me too.
and that were pertinent to my journey, and because I know I'm not alone, and that's why I have a podcast and I want to be a conduit of information. It's still a way to network. It's not just necessarily just kind of drawing the information, but like if this person has a good experience on the show with me, like is that the type of person I could reach out to later? Can I reach out to Pat Flynn from time to time with a DM and just be like, dude, I got a really quick question? And he'll be like, yep, here you go, or blah, blah, blah. Oh, you should connect with so-and-so. Here's a tip, by the way. I love this tip. At the end of a podcast, you should say, if you had a great time as a host and this guest blew it out of the water, then you want to always say, hey, is there any more guests or friends of yours in your network of your caliber that you think would be a good fit for the
Wow.
show?
That's actually a great thing to do. I will be
Yeah,
immediately
come on.
asking you that at the
So
end
it's
of this.
like, yeah. So they're just like, all of a sudden, they're just like, oh, I crushed it. And two, it's like, who do I know? Like maybe they know someone who maybe is not necessarily at their level, but like what I like to say is like on the come up. There you go. So now you're networking, right? So now all of a sudden you've interviewed people in their circle, your network shrinks, or not shrinks, but it expands. And at the same time, the caliber shrinks, so to speak. So that's what I think is huge. Other considerations, essentially, a lot of people want the authority, industry authority, and a lot of that can be achieved through rankings. One rumor I like to dispel pretty often is ratings and reviews. Those do not boost your podcast by any stretch of the imagination. I've talked to a couple people at Apple. They're important if you want to see if the podcast is good, maybe. If you're considering having that person on as a guest of yours, you could see what people are writing about them. But ratings and reviews, they have no bearing whatsoever on where you can rank. Where ranking comes into play is subscriber velocity. One of my clients is averaging right now, we got them from 140,000 downloads a month. They're approaching 700,000 downloads a month in about 5 months. Yeah, they are absolutely destroying it. And they're very high level. They're like, well, hey, Rich, a friend of mine has a show, and she says she gets about 2 million downloads per month. And we're only at like 300,000 when he wrote this to me. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, so how are we possibly ranking higher than her? I was like, because more people are subscribing to your podcast over a month than hers. It matters. So that there's a very big difference there. So like, yeah, you want to be an industry authority, subscriber velocity. How do you do that? Recommendable episodes. How do you do that? Promoting it the way we talked about, like all these little things. So I don't want to say it's easy, but You can rank. Meta and D and Meta ranked, I believe the highest they got was number 11. And one of D's friends had been podcasting forever, and they were right behind them. And she's like, I can't believe this is happening. I'm like, I can.
That's so great. Yeah, I think the quality and recommendability of a podcast, and then you know consistency uh, has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
And then I'm glad you brought up networking, because there are a lot of different reasons to do a podcast. Certainly, a lot of people are like, man, I want my podcast to grow explosively. I want it to be the biggest thing ever. I want to be an authority in my industry. All valid reasons. The other one that I've found is that by connecting with people, if you have networking in mind, absolutely great move. But sometimes I'm just talking to super interesting people and I don't know what the next thing is going to be. I don't have any intention of like, oh, we're going to work together, or I want something for you. What I found is all of a sudden I've got a new friend. They reach out to me, I reach out to them, something happens. The sort of unintended positive consequences of conversation, I think, make a great reason to have a podcast.
I completely agree. I mean, yeah, sometimes people have said things on the podcast that I didn't know I needed potentially for like my business, right? Whether it's a tip or a service or an offering of theirs, or maybe they say, oh, one of my friends opened this business and it helped me. And I'm like, wait a second, I need that. So after we stopped recording, I'm like, give me the deets.
Yeah, right.
Like, what's going
Yeah,
on here?
I want to know more about that.
Yeah. So you're exactly right on that. I think intentionality is everything. And yeah, I think you're right. Like if you go in just trying to be like, I'm adding this person to my network, now I could say I interviewed them and they're part of my network. No.
It's kind of
That's not the
gross,
same
isn't
thing.
it?
Yeah, that's not the same thing.
No, it's not. And I think that I am who I am, but I believe that so much. I think your
Yeah.
intention has everything to do with it.
Yeah.
And when you have fun and you're enjoying someone, and the intention is just to have a great conversation, let the field of possibility take care of everything else,
100%.
because you just never know. So let me ask you a little bit about entrepreneurship. What surprised you? What have you learned that's really surprised you about being an entrepreneur?
Everything takes longer than you think.
That's a great one.
Period. It doesn't matter. You can make. It's like turning a battleship around. Like, it's not gonna happen fast. So sometimes when you make these changes, we're gonna really push email marketing. Anything new that we introduce, number one, you really have to get your team's temperature on that, because they might just be in like, oh, Rich is in good idea fairy mode again. Like, here we go, like over and over and over, like something new. So it has to improve your core offering, and it has to be consistent with your core values is how I like to put it. But those changes can take 60, 90, 120 days. Again, it's like fitness is such an easy parallel here. It's like, if I come home from my first day of my new workout and look in the mirror, I'm an idiot. What do you expect to see?
That's one of my favorite quotes of all time now. Yeah.
So there's that. Everything takes longer than you think. I would also say delegating has become just massively important. One of my guests actually had a VA hiring agency, and I did not interview him for that. And by the end of it, I was a client of theirs. And now that person who I hired initially, who was a VA, is now like my chief of staff. And she's absolutely running circles around people who used to work for me, who were, in theory, way more qualified. But delegating as much as humanly possible so you could stay out and up, right? Like, I mean, I guess it depends on where you kind of stand in your role. Are you an executor or the visionary? Like, for me, it's important to just kind of think up and out. So that's where I need to stay. I used to be a pilot, so when you're down and in too much, like, you're not observing what's going on outside. It's like, hello. So that's where I need to be. So delegating is hugely important. And that not only carries over just professionally, but personally too. I'm looking outside at my lawn right now. I haven't mowed a lawn in forever. Not because I don't enjoy it, but you know what? Is that the best use of my time? I'd rather go walk around the neighborhood, with a weighted vest and get a little workout in if I didn't have time to go to the gym than mow my lawn. I'm not one of these people who's obsessive about the landscaping or anything like that. If I have the capacity to do it, I will outsource it. And it's all about just like, how much value do you place on your time? How many $10 an hour tasks are you assigning yourself? when you shouldn't be. So that's another thing I would say. And last I would say is the numbers, the desire to grow your business or maybe hit a certain numerical or financial or revenue goal. It's just, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm I'm happy with the runway it may take, meaning I'm more invested in what we said at the very beginning of the show in helping people. And sometimes that means operating at a loss. Sometimes that means breaking even with a certain big project. Sometimes that means striking gold with a couple people who you could serve at an unbelievably high capacity, and it happens to be lucrative too. But I have become less obsessive of some of my financial goals in terms of really perfecting the craft and demonstrating that we are beyond a shadow of a doubt the right decision. That is hugely important to me. So those are three takeaways right there.
Dude, all of those are such incredibly good advice for entrepreneurs and podcasters, anyone trying to do any endeavor. I think you're what you said about like, being up and out and seeing what you're doing, an entrepreneur's role or someone who's in charge's role is to be the pilot. And if you're looking down at the controls all the time, I love that analogy. Yeah, you're going to crash into the side of a mountain. And then also just being stubborn about what you want. I think when you put the focus on serving others, I just agree with this so much. I have to follow up with you on this. When you put the emphasis on serving others and not what you get,
Yeah,
I think you get
it's
more.
true. It's not a cliche.
So instead of having financial goals like I want X, I want the big everything, I want all this stuff, I want to scale. How about you put your energy into thinking about how you're going to help the client you have, or how you're going to help this person or that person, and then the rewards come back. It's amazing to me that more people don't see that.
Let me say this. That podcast, NFTs for Newbies, I left it at the beginning of May. I haven't been podcasting since then. That was a critical decision because it was going so well. And I knew we had something special. And at the same time, I knew if I walked away, I may never have that kind of podcast success again. But you know what I did have? I had onboarded a few clients, and I just felt instinctually that I was kind of splitting my attention a little too close for comfort, and I didn't want to do that. So I wanted them to know that we were absolutely obsessive. And the kind of compliments we get or the kind of feedback we get is you guys are all over it. Like we never have to think, or this, like all the things you want people to say about you and what you're providing them make you, just like a podcast, recommendable, right? So it's like, I had to make a choice, and I'm so excited. I'm going to be starting a podcast again here soon, and we'll truly see if it's repeatable and if I know what I'm doing. but I had to choose, and just like you said, it's like, am I there for them? Do they ever have to think? Is Rich and his team like? Do they got this or not? Like they never have to. We always kind of make it this informal thing. I'll say it on this podcast, but my clients, I don't think will hear it, but we never want them to be waiting on us ever, ever, ever. We always want to be waiting on them and respectfully, you know what I mean? Like, hey, we're all set. Get us this by this date and we're going to be on timeline, on target, and we're good. I never, ever, ever want that email where Steve's like, hey, do you have that thing yet?
we haven't heard
mortified
from
if
you
that
in a couple of weeks. What's up? Man, I hate
No
that.
way.
Yeah, my whole philosophy of business is that I worked my way through college waiting tables and in fine dining. And so high pressure fine dining. So I love noticing the room and seeing what
Yes,
someone anticipating needs. So we're all about anticipating needs and making it not about
100%. I
us,
love it.
and that works. So you're going through a lot of changes, you're growing, a lot of cool things are happening for you right now. What would you name this chapter of your life?
Addition through subtraction is the season I'm in. I say no to so much, just like I talked about those conferences. Like, no, sorry. I just had a prospect call yesterday. We had a discovery call. Then I talked to the other partner. DocuSign was already out. Everything was good. They just wanted to add a couple things in that were very easy add-ins. And then at the end, the question came up. Let's just call it. I'll just be very simple. Let's just say it's $100. Okay, I don't want to give the actual number. It's a lot, but $100. And they're like, yeah, we're good, but we have a board because this is a startup. So like we're good for 80. 90, we'd have to get approval. 100 we can't do, but we understand if you don't want to do business with us because of that. I'm like, I was like, yeah, I could do it for 80 or 90. Like, let me just look at all the things I would have to take off. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, uh, yeah. Desperation is a cologne that everyone could smell, right? So it's like, no, so what happened was, Steve, I was so proud that we didn't really flinch there. And what I actually came back with, and I'm that chief of staff who I got from a podcast episode, like that agency I found through a podcast episode, she hit me in the chat on the side. She's like, extended payments. So I said, we could also make it payments up to 6 months versus 90 days. They're like, oh, well, that's different. And there you go. So I got a text later that night, like, we're proceeding. I'm like, I'll send it over.
That's great. There's a lot of knowing your worth in that.
Yeah. But it's addition through subtraction, right? It's just like, what are you saying no to? What are you not willing to compromise on? What are non-negotiables to you? I think that would be the season I'm in. And that has been, I was supposed to go to a mastermind a few days ago for 4 days after just getting back from a trip. I decided at the last minute to not go. It may have seemed unprofessional, but I got to spend a lot of time with my daughters who I've been not seeing so much lately because of travel. And it was, as always, and I put this in the LinkedIn post, I never regret that time.
Yeah. I saw your post and I was actually happy for you that you skipped it. Just because sometimes, you miss your life when you're just so goal oriented that you're not like seeing what's around you, So I think that's amazing, and good for you. I love that theme of the phase you're in, and I only have a couple more questions for you because I actually do have to let you go. This could be a 3-hour episode,
Yeah.
no problem. So my final question for you today: if you could tell your younger self something and give yourself some advice, what would that advice be?
It's hard now. It's like my motto now is like never settle, my mantra, so to speak. But yeah, I wish I could have understood what that actually meant earlier. There was a lot of my Marine Corps career where I kind of settled at the thought that I couldn't be, a top 1% Marine or whatever. I was kind of like happy to not be at the bottom and not necessarily be an over executor, but I was just intimidated by so much of the talent around me. I was more worried about just like keeping up than I was about exceeding my own self-inflicted limitations. So don't settle. And again, I really try and tie everything personal and professional, but I'm previously married and like it's easy to talk about now. It's not super uncommon, but I did those things for the wrong reasons, or I was in a bunch of relationships for the wrong reasons. And I was just like, I'll just settle until, it just gets to a point where it's like, there's like almost like a catastrophic event needs to happen in order for you to walk away. And that's just not how it is. You could just make a U-turn at any time you want. And no one's keeping score on you. Steve is not interested if I start and stop a podcast. He's not keeping score. Like we imagine that there's like this just like group of people who has a microscope on us, and that just could be the furthest thing from the truth. All it is an exaggeration of what you have in your own mind. So I would probably say just never settle, but understand what that actually means. Is that the long-term implications of some of your current decisions are just going to be, just negligible. In 30 days or a year or 5 years, the deal. So that's what I would say.
Man, I love that. So often in our lives, we're so afraid of change. We're so afraid to change something up, and we'll convince ourselves that a situation is okay. If it's not, it's not. And it takes a long time to learn that. So
yes,
I think you and I have been through some very similar things. And, you build a lot. I always remind myself when you go through things like that of think of all the character you're building and how it'll come in handy later down the road.
Yeah, it's all part of the story that you're going to tell. So there you go.
Yeah, it is. Well, this has been absolutely great, man. I had such a blast talking to you today. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. I hope your audience got something out of it. I really do. And yeah, I really appreciate the time. And like you said, we could have sat here forever, but
you're an amazing person. I love your energy and I love what you're putting out into the world. So just keep being you, man. You're killing it.
Thank you so much. And have a great rest of the day.
Want to hear more inspiring stories? Subscribe on your preferred podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, and share. It's the best way to support us. Thank you for listening to Brand Story.